Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are at an away game today up in the Napa Valley, just at the tail end of the fires, under about 70% containment, and it's some of the devastation is rather large. We'll be taking a quick tour this afternoon to check it out. But we're here to have an amazing conversation. Let me just preface this podcast with a brief description of Joanne DePuy's contribution to the judgment of Paris, since we're doing a series on that. And that is, it's very possible that it wouldn't have happened the way it happened without her contribution to all this, and we're going to peel that back in a second. So that being said, oh, and by the way, we're here at the beautiful Vintage House Hotel here in Yountville, which is, I think, the most quaint part of Napa Valley. And the Vintage House has got great value and great rooms, and just don't get one next to the freeway. That's all you have to be aware of anyway. And welcome to the show, Joanne. This is going to be a ton of fun. Thank you for the book called The Rest of the Story. It's kind of like, what was the news anchor's name? Paul Harvey.
Yes.
And now you know the rest of the story. So tell me briefly, we had an amazing conversation already. I wish I had recorded all of it. You grew up in Altadena, or at least that's where your childhood was spent.
Right.
And that's where my daughter lives. I live in Arcadia. Our office is in Monrovia. So that part of your life, when did you leave Altadena?
When I got married in 1949, after I graduated from college.
So right after you graduated from college, you got married. Huh? That was it. Did you go to college and get married, or you just? That's. Did you meet your husband in college?
I did.
And what were you studying in Berkeley?
And he was from Napa.
Oh, he was?
Yeah. I was majoring in international relations.
Ah, okay. They're starting to put the piece of the puzzle sort of coming together. So, and he was doing what?
He was in law school at Hastings Law School in San Francisco.
Yeah, sure.
So we lived there for a year, and then decided where we wanted to set up a practice. And the place that I wanted to be in Southern California would be the beaches, because I grew, during the summers we went to Balboa Island.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, during the war, I got a certificate to be a lifeguard, because during the war, that's the Second World War, there weren't a lot of people around to be lifeguards.
So Balboa being Orange County, and was it a quaint part of the beach community back then as well?
Oh, it was so amazingly different, yes.
The bungalows that are still on the island actually probably from that era, or maybe even
earlier.
earlier.
Oh, yes. I think so.
Because we have a house in Hermosa Beach, and so I grew up at the beach.
Well, my uncle was from Hermosa Beach, and we used to go down there
Really?
in the 30s, 40s. Wow. And Hermosa was something else. I mean, it was so small, and the beach was wonderful. And
isn't it amazing how different the beach community? Of course, this is off subject, but being born and raised in Southern California, I find the personalities of the beaches so different, even from city to city. You know,
I couldn't go to. We used to go to Little Corona to body surf.
Yes, right.
And I could no longer go down that hill, and I don't know what that hill looks like. I haven't been there in such a long time.
I think it's still there.
I bet it is.
My nephew was surfing there all the time. It's a pretty local place now, right? You don't just...
Yeah.
You know, they'll
Everybody
pop your tires.
No, yeah.
So this is the part that kind of why I started with this notes here about, how did you end up in Napa in 1949? You talked about your husband wanted to practice here. It wasn't agricultural law at that point, was there really? Or was he doing that? Or what was he, just business law in general?
He actually ended up in estate law, but he just hung out his own, his shingle. And we were deciding between going to practice in Balboa Island, and there was one attorney there. And he went to see him, and he said, no way unless you have an independent income. No way. And this is in 1950. Well, that was completely wrong, because everything just exploded down there after that time. But I came up to Napa, and his parents lived here. And I was just blown away by the beauty of Napa Valley. It was a very small town. For someone coming from the Los Angeles area, it was pretty much backwater. And people really were unaware that there were vineyards here. And of course, there weren't very many wineries at that time. So he finished law school in 50 and the bar, and we moved here, and he hung out his shingle. And then as time went on, he took on Jim Fogarty as a partner.
Yeah.
And then Joe Peatman joined them. Jim became district attorney, and Joe Peatman joined them. The firm was Dickinson, Peatman, and Fogarty.
And they're like downtown Napa, what would be proper Napa today. That part of town. Downtown Napa.
Was very
Napa.
When we first went over the bridge, Howard had told me about the Napa River, and I envisioned the beautiful blue Danube. And we drove over the bridge, and I looked over, I said, "Oh, what is that?" There were tires floating in it. And he said, "That's the Napa River." And I said, "Oh."
Not my vision.
Not what I was thinking.
Okay, that's funny. So, but just for the listeners, who have not been to Napa Valley, Napa, we talk about Napa, there's a town of Napa. It's a rather large town, I suppose, compared to the rest of the valley, where there's restaurants and hotels and a lot of activity. There's Oxbow and the cooking school and things. But then as you head north up the valley, we hit the smaller towns like Yountville, which is a very quaint, so I suspect for most people, Napa, the town, is not the vision of what the wine country is. It's more like Yountville or St. Helena or Calistoga or something. And so back then, were those little towns still around? Was there a Yountville, Mr. Yount, and was there a Calistoga?
Yountville was where the Veterans Home was. And there were just a lot of bars, and the veterans would come down because they couldn't drink at the Veterans Home, so they'd come down to Yountville, to the city, which was, half a mile away or something, and there were just a lot of bars. Yountville was nothing. In fact, I loved, when I moved to Yountville, which was in 1978, I would see people and they would say, "Oh, where are you from?" The Bay Area or whatever. And I would say, "Yountville." And they would say, "Oh," and then they'd go and talk to somebody else. And I loved it. It was like reverse snobism. I just loved it.
Isn't that funny? So
yeah,
now
it's
entirely
different.
And it seems to be sort of the hub of I don't know, I'm not going to say aristocracy, but all things Napa, where you come to Yountville and you can walk to Bouchon and you can go to JCB's Atelier. It's a totally different environment. So I want to ask, you said something interesting to me, because I had a conversation with Bruce Nyers last time we were up, and we were talking about the veterans of the area, and I mentioned Omar Khayyam's in San Francisco, which was a restaurant, and he used to serve the veterans of the war free.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, if you wore your uniform, you got free food there. And he was a very famous guy, George Mardikian, but I just thought that was interesting that you mentioned that, because I didn't know that. It seems like there was quite a veteran presence here after the war.
Oh yes, oh my yes, and now it's a very nice place if you can get in to retire. Really.
Yeah, well, for sure. if you can afford to retire here. We're going to talk about that too, some of the changes that happened in Napa Valley. So you landed here with your husband. He started the practice. What were you doing at that time? Just to be a good wife, or were you trying to start something?
Well,
no problem.
I first, we had children after we moved here, and I raised 3 children, did volunteer work, and eventually, when my youngest, two were in college, and one was 16, I got a job at a travel agency.
Yeah.
and then I started my businesses.
That, raising 3 children, particularly here. My wife and I were just discussing today at breakfast. We raised 3 girls, and then now they're having kids, and we seem to be now being pulled from both sides of the fence. When up until a certain point, we didn't have to worry about our parents, and we kind of just worried about our kids, and now we're worried about everybody. So that is a tall order. And then you went to work.
And I'm one step ahead of you because I now have great-grandchildren.
Wow,
and
great.
Great.
Wow.
4-year-old twins and a 2.5-year-old
Wow.
girl. And they live in Napa, and
So
which
they're
is
nearby?
absolutely wonderful.
That's great.
They were born and raised here. Yeah.
Did your kids stay in Napa during their adolescence?
One of them did, Chuck, and he joined the law firm.
Oh, he did? Oh,
And
so,
he's
wow.
now retired.
Wow, full cycle.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. So this idea then, we'll get to this point where you started this sort of idea of tennis and wine, but were you a tennis player and then you loved wine because you lived here? Did you love wine before you got here? When did all that happen? When was the aha moment for you for wine?
I was divorced and hadn't worked other than volunteer work, and I knew I was going to have to work. So what was I going to do? And I I had 6 months to think about it, and I thought the things I like most, and I only want to work at something I like, are tennis and wine. I was a tennis player and a wine drinker, interested in wine, and so I started 2 businesses. In 1973, I think it was a good time to start a business. At least I worked so hard. I mean, you have to work hard.
Yes.
It was amazing how both of them took off. Wine Tours International, Inc., I started, and Tennis Limited, I
So they're
started.
2 separate...
Absolute separate businesses.
Wow. So and Tennis Inc. was about traveling the country and playing at the great stadiums? What was it about?
It was about taking people overseas or wherever. Well, actually, I started it from the book, The Best Wave. What was that book that...
I don't remember.
Yeah.
From that era?
And he was, yes, and this fellow who wrote it was searching the world for the best waves.
Oh, that's right.
Body
Yeah, I know.
surfing.
Yes.
I mean, board surfing.
Right, certainly. I remember the book.
And so my idea was that we were going to go around the world looking for the best tennis court. It
Well, that was
happened to be...
Pretty clever idea.
It was a wonderful idea, and it was a private club. We did not advertise. My friends up here helped me start it, and Frank Sinatra's wife, Barbara, joined.
Wow.
It was limited to 400 people, and Clint Eastwood and Maggie Eastwood joined.
Wow.
And we went all around the world searching for the best tennis court in the world.
That is so fun. And I don't know about then. I'm thinking 1973. I mean, I can call. Well, I did yesterday. I called Bordeaux. I pick up the phone and call somebody in Bordeaux.
Oh
and
my
talk to
God.
Them. That must have been
Having
murder.
a business then was the most difficult. We didn't even have faxes.
Yeah.
We only had telephones.
Yeah, faxes didn't come out till like 79, I don't think, 78.
Right. And so I would have to wake up in the middle of the night and call Paris to
Wow.
do business
Yeah.
with them.
And set up hotels and set up buses. And
Everything.
That must have been unbelievable. But I guess it's all relative. You do what you did. But the concept of just going around and, I suppose some of the great stadiums aren't around anymore, but was it Roland, what's the French stadium?
Roland Garros.
Yeah, Roland Garros. And,
I went over there, and in fact, I got in to see somebody, and he got tickets for us, and
wow.
and we stayed at the Royal Mosseau Hotel, which is
Beautiful.
a wonderful hotel.
So the wine side, I'm guessing, so now you're at 73. How many wineries were in Napa? Probably like what? 28 or 50 or some really small number.
I don't think there were that many. And well, when I came to Napa, the population was 9,500. It's now 146,000, I think, or something like that. I don't know. What was the question?
So the wineries, the count, because, well, I'll reference this. You've heard the news of Armenia being invaded by the
Azerbaijan.
I always say it wrong. And I'm Armenian, I should know this better, but as far as its pronunciation, but they've doubled in wineries from 27 to 54 since the independence in 1988. So I'm thinking, wow.
Oh, it was amazing.
I don't think
there were
that
only
much
a couple that you could go to, and that had tastings of any kind. And now I guess they're over 500.
Yeah, in Napa there's like 4,000 something in California, but in Napa there's 500.
I mean, in Napa.
So
yeah.
what made you think if there's such a small, and of course the judgment pairs haven't happened yet. I was looking at my dad's documentation when I bought this company for my father in 1988. There was a list of wineries that had clubs like what my dad was trying to start. It was just a handful. It was like Louis Martini and Sebastiani and the big boys. But in 1973 and 75, when I was stocking my dad's shelves, there wasn't a lot to put on the shelf. There was, in fact, we have on my desk, I still have it, at my dad's store, he would type out the wines that were available that are on the shelf. So if somebody grabbed a bottle of Sebastiani Chenin Blanc, they would bring it to the table, to the cashier, and I had to look at the price. It was like $2.85, for a bottle. But if you look at the list, it's the same wineries. It's Burgess, it's Louis Martini. It's just a handful of people. We just kept changing the varietal to make the list long enough. How would you have the idea to have international wine touring when the population here of wine people was really wasn't that big? It wasn't that significant.
It took me about 10 years to realize that I had majored in international relations and was always interested in international things.
That's interesting.
I wanted to build what I called a wine bridge. I love to travel, and I was an IATA travel agent by that time. So my husband and 3 children and I went to Europe for vacation for 5 weeks. He took off from the law firm.
That's a long vacation.
Yeah, that was a long
with
vacation.
Kids.
and the children were 12, 15, 18, 17. Yeah, and 13. And so we flew to Amsterdam and got a car, took a train, went to Stuttgart, picked up a Mercedes, and drove to Greece. That's quite that's quite a drive. And that was wonderful. And then we took the Brindisi ferry to Italy and drove from Italy to Amsterdam and flew home.
That's amazing.
And it was 5 weeks. And so we toured France. And we loved going into a shop somewhere and getting some bread and cheese and a bottle of wine.
Yep.
And we'd have a picnic, and that's what we did. I mean, it was wonderful. So when I decided to start these but so few people had been to Europe that were in Napa at that time. And there's so much to tell.
That's so, well, I'm going to stop you there for a second, because just that lifestyle change, because particularly in the 70s, America was America, and Jacques Lardier, Louis Jadot said to me, that's the beauty of America. It's new. There are no rules. They're not bound by the traditions of French society or Italian society. And you have the ability to create your own foods and start from scratch. But here you are as an American, you go to Europe and you find out, wow, that is a pretty cool lifestyle. We don't have charcuterie here. We didn't anyway back then. We were probably eating frozen Salisbury steak. So here you are, getting a fresh loaf of bread and fish sticks. Yeah, Van de Kamp's fish sticks. And so that must have been intriguing.
Well, and when I started, I met with Pierre Brigeaud. After there's so much before that, but when I went in to meet with Pierre Brigeaud, I told him I wanted to do these tours, and Andre Chelichev introduced me to him. That's how I got in to see
Pierre
him.
was who?
That would have been 75.
And what did he do?
Well, he set up all my.
Was he in Paris?
Yeah, he was on the Champs-Élysées.
Oh, he's on Champs-Élysées, okay.
And so Arda Ruas, do you know Claude Ruas?
I don't.
He started the Auberge du Soleil here.
Oh, he did?
And it wasn't built at that time.
The one up in Rutherford?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so his wife, Arda, there's too much to tell, but Pierre Brigeaud said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do this tour and take vintners through the wine country so they can learn about, and we'd probably go to Champagne, the Champagne area, Beaune and Bordeaux, and we'd have picnic. He said, what? Picnic? What is it? What is a picnic? And I said, well, at lunchtime we would have bread and cheese and wine and so forth. And he said, oh, no, we don't do that.
We don't do a picnic.
In France. Anyhow, he set it all up. And I had a ground operator, and I had a friend named Lomax Studi who lived in Southern California.
Yes.
He introduced me to Jean-Claude Murat, who was, at that time, head of the French travel agents based in Paris. He was my ground operator. And so he helped me make the ground arrangements. And Pierre Brigeaud and Andre made the winery visits, and they were fantastic. The French were wonderful to us.
How many total trips did you put together when it was all said and done, including the one where we're going to talk about when Mr. Barrett got the word? How many total trips did International Wine? What was the name again? International
Wine Tours International.
Wine Tours International. How many trips did you end up making?
How many did I make?
Total, yeah.
To France or to where?
It doesn't matter. Just like how many times just trying to establish the amount of work it took to put this group together.
And I combined wine and tennis with some of them, not with the one to Paris.
Yeah.
Though. That was not a tennis tour. That was
strictly
yes. And I don't know how many
total trips, but like a dozen maybe, or
more than that. I think.
More than that. Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah.
What?
I had 140 tennis trips.
Wow.
And they went all over the world.
That's a lot
Canada,
of travel.
Canada, South America, Africa, everywhere.
So
Hawaii.
we're going to jump to this booklet here, the rest of the story by the Paris tasting. So the Judgment of Paris. So it's sort of two things going here. So I want to start with here, because before you went to Bordeaux with this unbelievable list of people, we'll talk about that in a second, the group, and I'll tell you my side of the story, and then I want to hear how that happened. When I read the book on chapter 16, like I mentioned, and Patricia Gallagher was in Palos Verdes visiting her sister, and she came into my dad's store, and my dad has a little difficulty remembering exactly what she said, but he did say that she was with the Académie des Vins in Paris, and whether she was on her way to Napa to find wines or not, I don't know, but that's about the time this all started. How did Stephen Spurrier ask you to take him around?
Well, there was a member of the Cutterback family who owned a nursery in Napa that was in Paris and was a friend. They were friends of mine, and that a gal, I think her name was Glenda Cutterback, maybe. She knew Patricia Gallagher, and Glenda had heard about me and knew that I was doing wine tours, and told
Wow.
Patricia about me.
And you just happen to be in Napa, and you happen to know what you're doing. So did Stephen reach out to you?
No, then Patricia called me and asked me about wineries, and I told her the wineries I thought were especially good wineries. And I don't think I saw her until I went to Paris. So Stephen called me. She told Stephen. Stephen called me in 76, and he was going to be out here, and asked if I could take he and his wife to the wine country. And I made I told him yes, and told him the wineries I would be taking him to. And so I took him to Stag's Leap. I can still picture that, the way Stag's Leap Wine Cellars was at that time. And I took him to Chateau Montelena. And so...
This was early 76?
76, yeah, 76 so like early.
First quarter, probably, something, January, February.
It was about, I think it was in April, maybe. It was just before...
Wow, so it happened really quick.
Our tour left in May.
Yeah, right.
May 6th, I think. And so it was right before then. And I was very impressed with Stephen. A very attractive, articulate Englishman and a lovely wife. And we very much enjoyed our day in the Napa Valley. And when we went to, I think Stag's Leap Wine Cellars was probably the first winery we went to. I asked him if he wanted to go to Robert Mondavi Winery, and he said no because it was too big. He wanted to go to the smaller boutique, as they were called.
Wow.
And so that's why I selected the wineries that I did. And we went into Stag's Leap. I told them who Stephen was. And all my high-powered clients, I would tell the head of wine tasting there. I knew Warren also, but I didn't. I did my work with, and I've forgotten what his name was. I can picture him, but I told him he was from Paris and he was going to be doing wine tasting. They treated him much as they did my other high-powered type clients, and we had a nice private tour, and then he tasted, and that was when I first realized what a keen taster he was. And
wow.
Then he bought a couple of bottles, and he paid full retail price, which impressed me because most people that were associated with the wine industry expected some kind of that came up here, expected some kind of
they still do.
And so then we went on up the hill and went up to Chateau Montelena and et
So
cetera.
is that, and I had this in my notes, I didn't get to it, but was Andrei Telechev at Stag's Leap at that time, or was he still at BV?
No, he was never at Stag. Andre was never at Stag's.
But he did some
He was at
vineyard
He was
consulting.
at Beaulieu.
Yeah, he was at BV. So, and he had, making the great Georges Latour, particularly in the 60s and the early 70s. But I thought that Warren had him come out and walk the vineyard with him once or twice.
Oh yes, Warren consulted with him absolutely.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
so
he was a consultant really when he finished with Beaulieu. But when I met him, it was absolutely wonderful. Louis Martini, I first went to Louis Martini when I had this idea of starting this wine business. And Louis Martini, I talked to him for about 45 minutes. His father came in, and he was very charming. And Louis, when I was finished, said, you should meet Andrei Telechev. And I would like to have you speak at the Napa Valley Vintners Association and tell them what your plan is. And he said, November. And then he called me later and said, "Can you speak in October? Because speaker just canceled." And I said, "Yes." And I talked to the Napa Valley Vintners, first woman that ever talked to the Napa Valley Vintners Association.
That's amazing.
And I told them what I was planning to do. And when I was finished, Brother Timothy said, "Well, Joanne, I think it's well and good that you wanted to take people overseas. What I would like to see is a quality tour of the real quality tour of the Napa Valley." Well, I was so happy because I thought the vintners didn't want people to come to their wineries.
Wait, you gotta slow this down because you just mentioned, the icons of the industry, right? Louis Martini and then Brother Timothy, one of the Christian brothers. I mean, this is phenomenal stuff at a time when that had to be the good old boys network back then, was it not?
Oh, my, yes.
I mean, right?
Yes, and in fact, when I went there, I was nervous, except that Bill Yeager, I don't know whether you ever heard
of course, yeah,
Bill
of course,
Yeager.
Yeager, sure.
Well, I went with him my last year of college, knew him. My husband and he were fraternity brothers. And
now the story starts to get serious and interesting.
And so I felt good about it because he was at the meeting and a good friend by then, of course, and his wife Lila, Bill and Lila Yeager. They're both now gone, but I felt more at ease. And Brother Timothy certainly put me at ease. But the most important thing that I ever did was to start the Napa Valley Wine Symposiums. And that's another story.
That's a whole story in itself, probably.
And yes, and I got Louis Martini to be the head of the educational things, Brother Timothy to do something else. And it was at Silverado. And Silverado hired me to be wine director there. And that's another story.
So that's an interesting thing because you Brother Timothy bringing the idea up at your speech, and the idea is we'd like tours of the Napa Valley. Now, that one of the major stark differences between the wine business,
quality tours.
Quality tours.
They were having Greyhound tours.
Oh.
And the bus driver would be the tour leader.
Oh, oops.
There were tours coming to the Napa Valley,
Yeah.
but not a touring company. You'd go from San Francisco or something.
Yeah, right.
I was the first company to do only wine tours.
So, but isn't it interesting to you because even today, if you go to Pauillac, and I tried not too long ago just to walk into a winery and taste, and in my broken French, which is a little better now than it was, but I asked if they were open, and it's like, no, we're not open. You still really don't do that in France as you do here. Would this touring then be sort of the beginning of the way the Napa tasting environment evolved, and that we have tasting rooms that people can visit all the time and you can just show up if you want to?
And yes, and I started a group called the Napa Valley Docent Council, which I named the Napa Valley Docent Council. And there were a group of my friends, 15 men and women, who knew about the wine industry. Some of them had vineyards. I don't think anybody had, anyhow. And they were my tour leaders. So they were really knowledgeable.
Yeah, so they were here already.
They were not just bellmen from the hotel or something. Right. Not the bellmen from the hotels couldn't know about wine, but they didn't.
It just seems again, I have to go back to Jacques Lardier. America got to cut its own teeth and do its own thing, and now, and we haven't gotten to this point yet, but we're discussing the idea of the evolution of Napa Valley, which is, frankly, rather commercial. A lot of the conversations I have with the winemakers today, like I did with Bo, is, you're here and you've lived this, you've created it, you're largely responsible for much of what happened up here during those days. And listening to Bo Barrett, and I was trying to explain this to our guests in our last trip up here, and I arrived at the conclusion that you can't come here and buy this lifestyle. You can buy a bunch of vineyards. You can buy and build this monstrosity of a chateau if you want. But the lifestyle and the value of it comes from living it and the passion for it. And so you can say I have a winery and I make this wine, but when you listen to the indigenous folks like you and the Bo Barretts and the Winiarskis of the world, it's a different outlook because it's a totally different environment. And so you live
Absolutely.
this.
And when I first came to Napa, I mean, very first saw Napa, it was so beautiful. That's why we moved here, because the Napa Valley was so beautiful. And I firmly believe that it's a vortex, not only for wine and food, but also for health. And in the last several years, I've been very much involved in health organizations here.
Well, I'll tell you what, just a personal note, since, well, I guess this is going to be on YouTube, but you're 93.
Right.
And you walked up here and you joined me here, and you recall everything, and it has to be with your activity, and I'm convinced of this. My dad, like I said, will tell you all about the stories of Warren visiting our house and sleeping in my brother's room and all that stuff, and Mr. Barrett coming into the office, coming into the store, and remembers all of it. And I think it has a lot of that has to do with the energy, with the lifestyle, with the, you must have a drive about making things happen, stirring the pot a little bit. You're probably a little rebellious in your own way to make things happen and not take no for an answer, because producing trips to Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne at that time could not have been an easy thing to do. So let's touch on the Napa lifestyle change that's occurred since let's even 49, which is probably a long story in itself. But then we'll get to the actual trip to Bordeaux that you took these amazing vintners of California to. But 1949, you come here. It's really and I think that a lot has to do with what I just said. They're farmers. These people are really farmers.
Absolutely. And my friends from Altadena said, "What in the world are you going up there for? It's just a lot of prune orchards."
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't even think vineyards.
Really? So it's mostly grapes or plums and not grapes, but plums and apricots and almonds and things like that.
Yeah. Right.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why when people age here they do so well. There's so many prunes and plums. Just kidding. So I guess Altadena, which was, Pasadena, a hotbed of the San Gabriel Valley. Pasadena was a known, sort of commercial district of Southern California. Yeah, that would be a huge change. I mean,
it was, but it was close to Berkeley. It was close to skiing. It was close to the ocean. So that's the thing about Napa. I mean,
so let me ask you this. Maybe you can remember this. Maybe you can't. I don't. I came up here in 70. It was probably 74 or something like that. My dad wanted to load up fruit presses and whatever accoutrements for winemaking he could put and put them around his store. And I for 30 years now, I've been lugging those things around, and they're now adorn my building in Monrovia to signify to people there's wine in this building. But we came up in a station wagon and went just loaded the stuff up, and I don't remember what the place was like. I was too young to really care, frankly, but. And it seemed interesting to me when Bo Barrett said that his father didn't become a full-time wine person until well into the 80s, like 84. So 10 years after the vintage won the Taste of Paris, So when did it look to you that the commercialization of this business was really happening? Was it the 70s, or did it take a little while?
It was after the Paris tasting.
Had to be after the Paris tasting.
It was after the Paris tasting. Already the French had begun to come in, but Domaine Chandon was the first place, and John Wright was the head of that. He worked for Domaine Chandon, and was a very nice guy. And Michaela Rodino also went to work for St. Supery. When it started, the St. Supery came after that, and
Was it?
brought some of my friends' property.
Let me ask you a question then. Because right now, if you and I came here and started a winery, it'd be impossible to make any money. And when Mr. Barrett told me that it takes 13 years if you start from scratch to plant a vineyard, to harvest it, and make any money on it, turn a profit on it, we have no chance. And if you talk to Chris Corley of Monticello, those they bought in the 70s, and we talked about that. It was a passion to do that, but it'd be impossible almost for you and I to try and do that today.
Absolutely. Well, I would certainly agree with you. And there are a lot of people that come and go,
Well, did you happen, you said you listened to a couple of podcasts. Did you happen to catch the Barefoot Cellars one?
No.
And if you haven't, I would indulge you to listen to it. It's Michael Houlihan and Bonnie Harvey. And when you're talking about the old players, St. Supery and the Chandon and things like that, they created the largest wine brand in the country called Barefoot Cellars. And I'll leave it so the listeners will go drag this thing in and listen to it as well, because it's so interesting, because it's mostly about marketing of wine. But they ended up with 15,000 cases of juice in tank against some bad debt. And it was from pre-Chateau Souverain. So apparently, there's a whole thing about the farmer was owed some money or whatever, but this was Chateau Souverain being around here forever. But this was before it was called Chateau Souverain. It was just Souverain. And that, to me, it was a really interesting story.
Well,
they couldn't pay the bills. The farmer never got paid, yeah. So interesting how...
And Lee Stewart was the guy.
Right, that's
and Lee
right.
Stewart led my first 2 international tours.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. One was to
tight-knit group.
Argentina and one was to Paris.
I want to hear how, since you're talking about leading tours, you got Andre Chelichev, the godfather and even great godfather of California wine, to head a tour.
He was the most remarkable man. Louis Martini said when I talked to him, you should talk to Andre Chelichev. I knew of him, didn't know him, and so I called him and asked him if I could talk to him. Louis Martini was the introduction. I went to his house, and Dorothy answered the door and said he was in the kitchen talking to one of the winemakers.
Wait, did you call them and say you're coming, or you just showed up?
Oh, no, I called him. And so she asked me to sit down, and he finished, and she was knitting, and no talk. He came out in a few minutes and said hello, and sat down on a very high stool and folded his arms, and he said to me, "Now, young lady, what do you have to tell me?" So I started talking about my plans, what I wanted to do, and I talked, and I'd pause a little bit. Dorothy's knitting, needles clacking, and Andre just sitting there with his arms crossed. And I talked for at least 25 minutes, half an hour. Finally, I thought to myself, I'm just going to stop talking.
Yeah.
So I stopped talking. Andre sat there looking at me with this little squinting sort of. He said, "Young lady, you have a nucleus of great promise."
Wow, that's pretty articulate.
And he said, "Now I will tell you." And what I wanted to know from him was that I told him I don't know anything about the wine business. I'm going to do these tours, but I don't know why the growers don't like the vintners don't like the growers.
Wow.
I don't understand any of this.
Wow.
And so he went on for half an hour and explained to me. At the end, he said, I cannot lead your tours. I'm too busy. But maybe Lee Stewart might. So I went to see Lee Stewart. But I would see Andre occasionally, and that was in '73. So in '75, I guess I ran into him in the market, Valerga's Market, which is no longer here, and said, "Andre, when are you going to lead a tour for me?" And he said, "I am ready." And I said, "Really?"
Wow. You're probably like, what?
I said, "Really?" And so we went on shopping, and we ended up at the cashiers at the same time. And he and Dorothy were standing at the cashiers. Oh, and he said, Dorothy will kill me." And so we end up at the cashiers, and I said, "Andre, can I go home right now and call Louis Martini and tell him you're going to lead a tour de France?" And he said, "Yes." And then, so I got in the car, I drove home, I jumped out of the car, I didn't even take the groceries out. I think I left the door open. I ran in and called Louis Martini, and he said, "Sign us up."
Wow.
So I put together a tour of France, of Paris.
So that was Paris because, all right, so
That was the, yeah.
that was the tour. So now we're here. Now we're at that point. Steven Spurrier has decided to host this tasting. He decided it was going to be a competition rather than just an exposure of American wines to the French judge public, so to speak. And you have to. He can't. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. It's almost impossible in America to ship wine anywhere. I mean, my wife is in charge of compliance. That the fact that there even is a compliance department in our industry is ridiculous, but we have to pay taxes in virtually every state we ship to, and there's different paths for every state. It's ridiculous. But here you're trying to get wine to France, and Steven Spurrier is having that difficulty as well. Did he just out of the blue tap you, say, "Look, I got to get these wines here"? Or was it just
He called me up, and he said, "Joanne, help. I can't take all this wine to Paris. Can you work it out for me?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm sure I can."
Yeah.
Having no idea in the world what I was going to do. So I called the Wine Institute in San Francisco, and there's a guy there named Larry Kahn. Did you ever know him?
I only knew Wendell Lee.
This was Larry Kahn.
I think he was the attorney guy there.
I'm not sure what his position was there, but I said that I'd like to talk to him about this, and he said no, he wasn't interested in talking to me, and I should talk to somebody else, blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Well, I'm going to be in San Francisco tomorrow," which I wasn't, and I'd love to just stop by. And he said, "Well, all right." And so I went in and I told him what I was planning to do about these wine tours, et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm getting a little behind. But anyhow, he said, he listened to me for a long time, and I told him that I would like the wine list of the Wine Institute. So because I didn't know who I was going to send these invitations to,
sure,
et cetera. "Oh, well," he said. The next day he called me, and he said, "You came into the office like Mary Poppins. And you told me all these things.
Your bag of tricks."
and I'm going to give you this list, but I will not admit it to anybody. He gave me the list, sent me the list, and really, then I sent I sent to that list the brochure about Lee Stewart leading the first wine tour to Argentina. And I was so thrilled. Elizabeth Church, who was the editor of the Chicago
Really?
whatever
Tribune,
food and
the food,
beverage.
yeah.
she signed up for it. And I told my son John, who was still living at home, I was so excited about it. I said, Elizabeth Church from Chicago signed up for this tour. And he pounded on the table. He said, if I hear one more word about your business, I'm leaving this house. And I thought,
wow.
I guess he doesn't want to hear about my business.
That wasn't
anymore.
right. So how did we, after you talked to the Institute, we're trying to get, was it 2 bottles each of those wines that you were supposed to get over there?
No, now, Stephen had 3 cases of wine delivered to my house. And he put them, I said, you can just, the door's open, you can just put them on the foyer. I lived up in Yountville.
Which is no longer legal, just so you know. Go ahead.
So he just whoever he had, bring them up. Oh no, I lived in Napa then. And so my son was at Berkeley, and he said, "Hey, Mom, that was great that you those were really good wines that you left in the foyer or something." I said, "Chuck, you didn't." He and his buddies came up to go wine tasting, and I said, "Chuck, you didn't drink any of those, did you?" And he said, "No."
This is amazing.
No, I didn't. We didn't drink any of those.
He was pulling your leg on that?
Yeah.
So, but 3 cases.
So, Earl Hankin was my TWA agent that I worked with all the time. And they were TWA. Air France were both.
TWA.
Air France also hired me as a consultant. So they'd send me first class to France. And TWA sent me first class to wherever I wanted to go. And Earl Hankin said, I'll go with you in taking the wine we had to stop in Boston. I'll go with you to Boston. And, I said, okay, fine. So Stephen calls me and says, I wasn't able to get Chalone wine, so could they deliver it to your house, and you'd have to hand carry the Chalone wine. And I said, sure. Chalone didn't get it to the house, and it didn't get it. And I called them, and I said, I'm leaving tomorrow on this tour with 30 people, and I can't take it. Well, they said, if you want to take it, you'll have to stop by on your way to the airport and pick it up.
Like you have nothing else on your plate to worry about.
Exactly. And so my fiance at the time, who was taking me to the airport, did not want to do that. He said, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I said, I can't disappoint Stephen. I just can't disappoint Stephen. So we did. We stopped by the wine shop in San Francisco on the way to the airport.
And that was a Chalone Chardonnay, probably.
Yeah. Well, it was on the list of the ones.
Right.
And Chalone never thanked me for taking them there. I never heard a word from Chalone. Well,
they didn't win. That's probably why.
Yeah, I think they were on. They didn't win, but they were on the.
They were. They were tasted for sure.
Yeah. And they didn't win.
So I thought there was this suitcase caper.
All right. So here's what happened. We got to the airport. My fiance brought the 3 cases in. Earl Hankin was there, and he said, I can't go with you we've had an emergency, and I can't go with you to Boston. And then in comes Andy Beckstoffer and Louis Martini and Jim Barrett, and he said, can't you ask one of those people to transfer the wine from Boston to the other plane or whatever it was, I don't remember. And I looked at them and I thought, none of those people's wines are in this tasting. Can I ask one vintner to carry somebody else's wine to Paris. I can't do that. It's one of the best decisions I ever made.
Wow.
And
That's
I said,
on the fly.
No. I said, no, I can't do that. And Andre came, everybody started coming, and there are 30 people. And we got to Boston, and Veronica DeRosa lost her passport, and she wouldn't be able to go, and that was a big thing I had to take care of. My daughter, who was going to Wellesley at that time, came to the airport to meet me, to see me during that 40 minutes, whatever I was there, and Veronica lost her passport. Oh my God. We found the passport, and the trip went on. But on the way back, when the trip was over, I left the tour a day early because my daughter was graduating from Wellesley, which is just out of Boston. And I think that reminds me that Bo Barrett said it. He remembers his father telling him he had to put all the wine in the...
Well, it's interesting. Go ahead.
And what happened was that Jim was... I'm sure this is what... Well, first of all, none of the vintners carried any wine at all. They didn't even know about it. They didn't know about
really?
what I was doing. They
Okay.
knew nothing about it. We got to Paris, that's another story, and the next day, Stephen and I had a lunch for the group, and then they were hearing about what was going to happen. There was a point where we discussed having bringing the vintners' wines to that luncheon, but Andre and I decided, Andre really decided against that. That would not be a good thing to do, to have all the vintners on the tour each bring a bottle of wine.
Yeah, right.
He said, and we did not do that.
I see.
And
Well, I think my dad's comment, because when I brought it up, he says, I remember Jim talking about it. Now, Jim walked into my dad's store after the tasting was done, after Time Magazine, June 7th, was released, and said his famous moniker to my father, not bad for a couple of guys from the Sticks. And then they went on to discuss it. And so what I think my dad is recollecting is Jim must have said yes, and there was this issue with getting wines there, and so he told the story. And my father sort of seemed to remember that it was about his suitcase in particular, but that's not the case. But there was an issue getting wines there, and then he must have heard the story that way. So
I see.
I read an article about you. I can't remember which periodical this was, but it sounded like something broke.
Oh my God, yeah. So we get into Paris, and the wine comes down, and Charles de Gaulle was just opened then.
Really?
Brand new. And they had chutes that you could see through it, and the luggage came down. And the luggage, the case of wine came down, and Stephen, we could never get away with this now, but Stephen was there with a cart to put it on, and I could smell it all of a sudden.
Oops.
And oh my God. And there was red on the side of the case, and I said, oh my God. And I thought, I've really disappointed Stephen. He had given me the wine, and I put more paper around each bottle and secured it better.
In a regular
the way he had. And
can't imagine that.
So Stephen was very gracious, very nice. He said, that's all right. And he told me the next day only one bottle had been broken. And I was afraid to ask him which one. And 10 years later, when they had the tasting, and he had to do of the tasting in San Francisco. And I asked him, and he said it was Three Mark Abbey.
It's funny. It's a slow-moving change, but I mean today, they even sell at the stores now those sealable bubble packs that are specifically meant to put wine in your luggage, and in case it breaks, it's self-contained. So we've come a long way.
Oh, wow.
There's styrofoam shippers and,
oh, wow.
and FedEx and all that, but they still break. We still get packages returned to our office all soaked in red wine
wow.
and all kinds of stuff, and it's tragic. But that's such an interesting, granular look at what happened. So I want to know about.
Go ahead.
Well, at some point, as the story goes, you're at a Bordeaux house, and I forgot which one it was at.
Chateau Lascombe.
Okay, and Mr. Barrett gets a phone call. I want to know who that phone call was from, because I was asking Beau about it. He thinks it was from George. But here you are. I don't think you're in the dining room, or you're having lunch.
All right, the Bordeaux vintners, 50 of them put on a fabulous lunch. It was not a picnic. It was a fabulous lunch. And we were having an aperitif, everybody standing around, the 33 of us. And a servant came up to me and said, Monsieur Berit, he is wanted on the telephone. Could you get him? So I went over to Jim, and I said, you're wanted on the phone. And the guy said, follow me. And so Jim and I followed him, a very circuitous route to the phone. Outside, inside, outside. And we go into this little office, and there's a phone on a small table. And Jim had to kneel down to talk on the phone. And he's kneeling down talking on the phone. I'm very worried because I knew that he and Laura had 5 children, and nobody knew where we were other than Pierre Brigeau, my ground operator, and me and Andre. They didn't know our schedule, so who could call him? So Jim knelt down, and then he did this to me and put it, his thumb and forefinger together. And I said, okay. And he said, I don't remember whether I heard him or he told me that later, or I read it in time. It's not bad for a kid from the sticks. I think I heard him say that, and then left and went back into the dining room. He came back and he said, that was Time Magazine, which was George
So
Hubert.
it's George, yeah.
Yeah, that was Time Magazine, and our wine won that tasting. I said, what? And Warren's won the red. What? Yeah. I said, well, I'm going to tell Andre. So I went over, and this is a very crowded room with Bordeaux vintners. And so I went over to tell Andre, and Andre said, shh, don't tell anybody. No, don't tell anybody. I said, all right.
So
he said,
funny.
we don't want our host to know this.
Yes.
I understand. Well, by that time, the word had kind of spread. I didn't spread it. Jim did, I'm sure, but very quietly, and none of our people did say anything. So we have lunch, and I'm sitting on the right of Alexis Lachine, and
Oh, wow.
Andre is sitting on his left.
Really?
And I said, and he's being very nice, and I said, I'm sorry, I don't speak French. And he patted my hand and said, that's all right. We all speak English, very condescendingly. Then he got up and gave a speech. The gist of which was, you're making good progress. The California wines are nice, and blah, 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 blah. This is the last day of our tour.
And he doesn't know yet.
And I'm smiling up at him, and Andre smiling up at him, and they were so gracious. And we left and we got on the bus, and there's a long road down with flags, and we went down that long road. Then there's a turn, and as we turned, the bus just broke into, everybody was saying hurrah, hurrah. It was like you won the big game.
That's amazing.
Kissing Andre and Jim, and it
That's
it was
phenomenal.
It was phenomenal.
So who's on this bus? You got the Barretts, I understand.
If you look at the last page of that, Andy Beckstoffer and his wife, and
the Beckstoffers, the Barretts, the Mirsus, the Ruddicks. Wow.
Ruddick was a professor at Davis.
The Telechefs, Andre's grandson, Andre and Dorothy. Unbelievable. What a list.
It was, and Arthur Haley, who wrote the books,
Martini. Arthur Haley.
Arthur Haley, I only took people that were vintners, but
That's
Arthur
phenomenal.
qualified because he had a vineyard. He was living in the Napa Valley. He and his wife Sheila were living in the Napa Valley then. And then Byrne Steakhouse, do you know what that is in Florida?
No.
Well, he wanted to go so badly, and I said, you can't because it's only... So he bought a Hasselblad camera or something like that, and he said, I'll go as your professional photographer. And Byrne Steakhouse in Florida is a big deal, and so he came along with us. He was the only one that was actually...
So that's what, we're getting on past an hour, so I'm going to wrap this up, and we can do this again when I come up. But I think the pictures from the actual tasting were from Mrs. Spurrier. I'm trying to remember who told me during this conversation that the actual photographs that were from the Judgment of Paris were from,
I think that's right.
Had she not brought a camera, that would have never been documented. But I want to wrap up with this thought, and I definitely think we need to continue this conversation. You're a wealth of Napa history and the people, but here's what I got out of the whole story, because the story's fascinating anyway, the Judgment of Paris, all that. But what I got out of the story was, here's a young woman who moves to Napa in 1949, and in 1975 she's having lunch with Alexis Lachine at a great Bordeaux house with the great, what were to become the great vintners of California. And what a testimony to your perseverance and drive. And it's probably the next conversation we have will be about women in wine. It's a very prominent subject right now, but I don't even know how to say this. What an amazing career, and what an amazing, how do I say this? You interjected yourself into and created something fabulous. And
Thank you.
Very inspiring, and I think that people that listen to this will be inspired by this story, because you do, at a time when the women didn't have businesses, they didn't even have college degrees, really. My mother will tell you that, and she went to UCLA. And here you are, you create a business, and you end up influencing what's now a $3 billion industry in California.
Wow.
So,
and it was so much fun.
it was a lot.
It was
can see that in your face.
a wonderful industry to work in.
I can see that in your face.
It was a wonderful industry. It was old-time Napa. It is not like that now.
So I think that we're going to start the next time I come up, that we're going to pick up at this point and move forward with what happened in your career after that, and continue with the conversation about Napa Valley and its progression through what it is today. And I've got a lot of opinions about that myself.
Wonderful.
Thank you for being here. It's been a fabulous conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.